Hello, everybody. My name is Sil, and I'm the DM, and we're going to be doing a quick recap today of the Frontier campaign. Not too much happened in this session. It was mostly just a bit of role play, which was a lot of fun. But doesn't really make for excellent TV. So we took up where we left off, and the party went and acquired Vanya's mask, which appeared to have come in the shape of this black mask etched with red clay, with this sort of almost bear-like shape to it. Upon acquiring the mask and Shay purchasing the large ceramic statue of the mountain with the elemental pouring itself out of it, the party went back to the keep to enjoy dinner and conversation for the evening. At dinner, they were joined by Brigitte and Brigitte's mother, a trio of priests, a very large woman with gray robes and black, a wild-looking, sort of unkempt man with red robes and black, and a bald, very short man with thick glasses with blue robes and black. Um, Beyond that, they were also joined with, of course, the Duke, Reinhard, and their good friend, Darcy Blackspeckle. Um, Everyone in the party basically just flocked to Darcy to converse with him, except for Vanya, who sat down with the Duke. Um, they had themselves some appetizers and talked for the most part, exchanged gossip and chatted and just carried on conversation. Um, some of it was about what was going on in the city and the movement towards getting troops ready to deal with a potential illicit incursion or assault. The current situation with the Church of Jeralism, which is the primary faith within the Empire, um, which was constantly alluded to something that the players never asked more information about. So, apparently, the church, which usually is a very powerful and uh, respected military force, is now extremely light on manpower. Apparently, the Archprelate of the Scaled Council, which, if people who are listening to this campaign also listen to the city campaign, they might recognize that particular religious order. Apparently, had gathered a group for an expedition into the west, and it had taken a lot of the forces of the church in the north. Um, and so they were all a little understaffed, basically. Um, And after this conversation went on for a while, it eventually got to the other realms of this country. The country of Roswin, which is where we all are. How the Empire works, and I'm sure I've mentioned this quickly in other videos, but I'll recap it. The Duralian Empire is this sort of overwhelming force that it doesn't fully occupy about half of the world, but pretty close. The continent of Warden is almost exclusively under the control of the Duralian Empire, except for a few independent zones, and even those are allies with the Empire. Uh, Almost all of the continent the players are on, Helfdom, is controlled by the Empire, but it's very far north and rather isolated, so it's really more of a no one else was willing to take it kind of situation. The continent of Aldebrin is split about 75-25 between what used to be the Empire of the Sun, an elven empire, and the rest of the continent is the Duralian Empire. Um, but a lot of the world's landmass is actually in the Krylvanian archipelago, which is a massive titanic shattering of islands that encompasses probably a third of the world. And when you consider that this planet is roughly 3 to 5 times larger than Earth, it's a lot of land. It's just broken up into extremely small islands. And as such, the islands have ended up becoming governed by themselves. They were originally parts of the Duralian Empire and the Elven Empires and other individual nations, kingdoms, and sort of sects. But that all changed when the Shattering occurred, and the Krelvain Forest became just a massive sea of islands. The people who survived that, and it's not a very large amount of the population, has spent the last 2,800 years or so, roughly. Uh, it might be closer to 3,000. I always get my math a little wrong between the ages. Uh, Resettling and rebuilding in the Crelvenian archipelago, but it's so scattered and broken that those empires that used to rule that land really can't control it feasibly anymore. And they honestly don't even try for the most part. If one empire started trying to take over the archipelago again, another empire might respond to it, but the Empire of the Sun became so broken because most of its land was in Krelvain that its power has greatly subsided, and it's almost just become a country in and of itself. Um, as for the rest of it, the Human Empire technically rules over half of Jiram. Well, a little bit more than half, probably 70%. But at the same time, it is a bit more of a melting pot of races. And after the liberation from the coup that occurred there before the Shattering, uh, where the races and nations that lived there were taken over by the Red Dragon Flight, led by a particular Duke of the Duralian Empire, illegally, in like a big old war crime. Uh, the Empire does control most of the desert continent, but it's almost like a separate entity from the rest of the Empire. Almost. Not entirely. And then as for the rest of the continents, there's the Ocean of Ultan, which is the entire eastern part of the globe, technically, if we're using Warden as a center. And there are some large islands with a large human population, which is still controlled by the Duralian Empire, but they have their own traditions and belief systems and are a little different. They're much more Asian-inspired than the rest of the Empire. And they only ceded control to the Empire after the Shattering had happened. During the time before, in the War of the Gods, that area still warred with the Elves, but it was of their own interests, not the interests of the greater Duralian Empire. Um, so yeah, there's just in this empire, these land masses are broken down into countries, which has a set ruler, usually an archduke or an archduchess. Though in some cases, those rulers are referred to as kings. It really depends on the individual ruler, but referring to them as a king is a bit of an archaic practice. And then, in order to make sure that no one king ever obtains too much direct power, or one archduchess or duke, their lands are actually divided up into duchies and dukes. Those countries are broken up into individual states. The duke, or the archduke or the archduchess, doesn't actually have land. They don't have a part of the country that they govern exactly. They might have their own land. They might have a large estate or a small town that they are in direct control over, but the rest of their country is run by the individual dukes and duchesses, who gather taxes, maintain roads, maintain military, and they send a percentage of everything they're doing to the archduke or archduchess, and they take everything in and manage and micromanage and try to keep these 3, 4, or 2 other duchies from, trying to war with each other for space or resources. It's really like multiple tiers of micromanagement. Um, and so this Duke Reinhard, who you're seeing on screen, Reinhard Pietvein, is the Duke of the Umoven Swamplands within the country of Roswin. And another member of the party, Vanya, is from New Wharf, a different duchy, which has a different duke, and it's where the Archduchess resides. Though technically she lives in a different city that's in the water of the bay of New Wharf, so they're usually just clumped together, though the city exists as its own entity. So they gossiped and chatted, and some members of the party learned some things about the world. It was a lot of world building for this session. to be honest. They learned a bit about Ezra Stroumhammer, the Duchess of Karaendall, where Damarand was, the city they were all going to be traveling to. And they learned a little bit about the specifics of Duke Zhu Yaoming, the half-drow who rules over New Wharf. In particular, his relationship with the church and his own partners, as Zhu is married to a human man and an Avix female, um, which causes a lot of conflict and uh, issues between him and the church, since he was married by a different faith, which is much more open to polyamory and communal sort of living and that sort of thing. In particular, the Triton religion, since the country of Rosewind is actually ruled by a Triton. The Archduchess is a pure-blooded Triton by the name of, I think her name's Zargana. I'll double-check that later. But yeah, so this was mostly what the conversation was. It was fun role play of introducing these characters and just building on the lore of the setting and sort of setting the stage for where the players were and what they were going to explore. Giving them room to interact with these NPCs and just have some fun. And I think it was a good time, including a lot of flirting towards Darcy. When they were all done eating, they all, for the most part, went to bed. A few requests were made along the way. In particular, Shay wanted a glaive if she could acquire one. And the courtier who sort of waits at the dining hall to announce people entering or leaving informed her that he could probably see if something could be pulled from the armory for her. And everyone went to bed. The dinner took up most of our time, if I'm remembering correctly. After the dinner, they spent a bit of time in the morning exploring the keep a little bit and meeting out front. In particular, Emerald did a little exploring into one of the gardens and found an odd flower that seemed to be snow white and with the ground around it frosted, though it's still quite early in fall, where it's still quite warm outside, and it wouldn't be frosted like this. Deciding he was going to pick the flower, they did, and everything went sort of black around them, like they were encompassed in shadow, and it felt as if something was right behind them. When they turned to look, whatever it was had gone, and the flower had turned from a bright white to a dark black. But they didn't seem too fazed by that. After meeting up at front and speaking with the Duke for a little bit and meeting Fizengun, Brigitte's gnomish bodyguard, the group saddled up their horses and rode out to the city. They made a lot of noise because the girls, well, they're just so pretty. Sorry, I will try and not make another reference to that song in this video. Sorry. So yeah, they mounted up and headed out. They learned the horses' names and picked steeds. Except for Anhal, who decided to stay behind. Because Anhal's player is just addicted to not being able to just decide on what they want to play. So hopefully that player will have a new character to be introduced into the next session. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen for the rest of the day, but NL decides to stay behind. Within Umoven, wanting to just not keep doing the craziness they've been doing. So the party moved on, took their horses out of the city, and did a bit of a ride. Getting out onto the main Triway, the Heftum Triway, which is the sort of main highway in this continent. It comes up from the Torak Forest to the south, and then heads west. East. I always get... In my head, I know what it is, but listen, it heads east, towards Rosewind, because if we were looking at the center of the continent, Rosewind is to the east. The road heads east and then branches off at separate points leading to the different duchies. So the group followed the road for a while. Navat, at one point during the trip, spotted a large creature hanging at the edge of the forest. It was a rather scarred and battle-worn Tyrannosaurus Rex. It is not extremely common knowledge to the rest of the world, but to the people, especially in Rosewind, the fact that there are still primordial reptiles and monsters and creatures within the Torak Forest is pretty common knowledge. Even Vanya had seen a creature like that before, and Vanya didn't know what a bear was, because there's just not that many bears here. There's T-Rexes. It's hard for the bears to survive when there's T-Rexes, and the bears that do survive are the kind of bears who probably put those scars on the T-Rex, which are big and scary. Uh, but yeah, the creature was about a quarter mile away, of open field, and they were a fully group traveling, clearly armed, tight knit on horses. So even if it was considering trying to ambush them, it thought better of it, having to clear all that distance across open field and retreated back into the forest. After a bit of traveling, they arrived into the town of... Shit, I don't remember the name of the town. I need to improve my notes, unfortunately. They entered into the town where Shay is from, as Shay wanted to stop by her mother's place, deliver the ceramic mountain, and visit her old boss, the foreman at the mine she used to work at, to sort of keep him abreast of the situation. She spoke to her mother a little bit, who seemed very concerned that her daughter was dealing with mind flayers, as she seemed to have a pretty apt understanding of her daughter's intelligence, and how, in particular, mind flayers like to have an easier time assaulting people with a reduced intellect. Um, and though her fears were not sated by the end of the meeting, Shay's an adult, and she wouldn't stop Shay from doing something Shay wanted to do. They shared an embrace, said goodbye, and Shay took her horse and rode it to the mine, where already it looked like the mine had been evacuated. Soldiers armed in plate mail were sort of at the gate doing patrols. Um, After not really spotting anyone she knew directly, or at least very well, she decided that everything seemed to be in order, and the group decided to leave at that point. The next break we took was when Fizzinggun got to the border between New Wharf, Karaendall, and Umoven, sort of this triangular spot in the Triway. Um, he bid them farewell, asked if they needed anything from him. They said no, and he left. It was about that. He did take a letter from Van to be delivered to their father, as long as the word of the Duke as well. Um, Also, during the dinner previously with the Duke had asked Vanya if they would deliver a private letter to the Duchess of Karaendall for him, and Vanya agreed. Traveling northward now, taking the northern branch of the road, they journeyed on for quite some while before they hit the very clear break between the swamplands and Karaendall, and had actually crossed the border of the duchy. And they decided to stop for some food, water, and feed the horses, and for the most part, just had a nice conversation with each other, talking and chatting. I don't remember if anything too crazy got revealed at all, but it was good in character moments. And after that, and them mounting back up their horses and riding ahead for another hour or so, that's when they ended up seeing the walls of a city off in the distance. And that's where we ended the session. So it was a lot of travel, a lot of exploring, taking the road, seeing the sights, and talking and conversing with NPCs. Hopefully in the next session they'll meet NL's new character. Yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming by. Sorry if this felt a little rushed. I'm still not back into the right sync of doing this on a very specific day. And honestly, I don't know if I'm going to do any better this weekend, because I am having company over for the weekend. And that usually is the thing that breaks my patterns. So yes, my apologies. I hope to continue to grow and do better at this. If you are interested, though, please check me out on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Selenanil. Link will be in the description. I have put out maps of many of the continents I mentioned in this video. In fact, all of them have a map up at this point. Are the maps finalized? Probably not. Some of them will keep getting reworked over and over again as I nitpick. Uh, and the map of Ultan is not completed because even making the map as big as I can make it did not allow me access to enough space to really fill in the entire ocean with all the large demi-continent-sized islands. On top of that, I am currently in the process of research for a special project, a Ravnica adventure book, complete with new subclasses, new backgrounds, magic items, creatures, and an entire story, which I'm believing once I get into the writing of it, based on the amount of content I have brewed for it already, will most likely take players from level 1 to level 10, all within the plane of Ravnica. If you are interested in Magic the Gathering's lore or Ravnica as a setting, I would highly recommend looking into the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, checking me out on Patreon where I'll be putting updates and sneak peeks to content and early access to content that I'm not ready to finalize yet. I've been doing mad research on this, and every little bit of help towards it literally means the world to me. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and just keep being amazing. Bye, everybody.